We'd like to welcome everyone to our Bountiful City Council meeting today on June 21st. And for our regular session, we will start with a Pledge of Allegiance led by Joanne Clunt. And then we will have a prayer by Tammy Matheson.
If you'll all stand and pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Our dear Heavenly Father, we come before Thee as a group of concerned citizens and leaders in our community, grateful for the chance we have to serve those that live within this beautiful, beautiful surroundings of Bountiful City. We're thankful for the opportunity we have to gather our minds and collectively go over information and plans and procedures and opportunities that will help bless and serve the citizens of Bountiful. We know there are many that are in need, that struggle, and we know this community and this council serves to bless them and to help them and to strengthen them and to buoy them up and to provide them opportunities to become better and enhance their lives. We're grateful for their service. We ask Thee to bless each member of this council, that Thou wilt bless them and their families and guide and direct them. And we ask a measure of peace and unity among our council, that they will feel guided and directed and loved one to another to be able to communicate their thoughts and impressions and their agendas and ideas and things that are important to them and their constituents. We're grateful for the moisture that we have received in this community. We're grateful for the blessings that it affords us to enjoy our beautiful, beautiful mountains and surroundings, and pray that we will continue to receive that moisture in tempered measures. And we're thankful for all our many blessings and for the guidance that we'll receive as we attend this meeting to help provide for the citizens. And we say these things in the name of Thy Son, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Thank you so much for that beautiful prayer. Tammy Matheson serves as the Stake Relief Society president in the Bountiful Utah Heights Stake. Thank you. And thank you, Joanne, for leading the pledge. We will now move to our public comment period, where anyone who's wishing to speak to the council can have 2 minutes. I'll just also remind anyone that might be here to speak about the budget items that there's separate public hearings time that's set aside for those a little later in the meeting. So if anyone would like to come up now during public comment period, we'd like to hear from you.
Hi, my name's Pamela Stavros. I live at 3973 Bridlewood Drive, and I'm here to talk about the Flip the Strip that you talked about earlier. We're in a severe drought, and it's going to continue to be severe, and we need to make some changes in our policies and our practices long term. Personally, we've already made some changes in our landscaping practice by not planting some of our flower beds and capping those off, not planting as many annuals, relying on perennials that are established. And we've done a lot of research on the Flip the Strip and taken the class that tells you all the things that you need to do in order to qualify for the rebate. The first thing that you have to do to qualify is you have to have a live park strip. We have 230 feet of park strip that we're watering right now in order to keep it alive so that we can qualify for the rebate. And so I'm asking you to move forward on that sooner than later so that we can access the rebates that other people in other cities and in the state are receiving. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Thank you. We will now move to consider approval of the minutes of previous meetings held. Okay, I have a,
I have a motion for you.
yeah, thank you.
So I'd like to move that we approve the minutes of May 24th for the city council meeting. And I'd like to move that we hold the minutes for the workshop meeting that was at 11 a.m. on that same day. My understanding is that there are a couple of minute corrections to the workshop meeting that need to take place, and so in order to make that easier on our recorder, that would be why I would suggest that we approve the minutes for the main council meeting, but hold the minutes for the workshop meeting.
Second that motion.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion carries. Thank you. We will now move to council reports. Do you have a report, Council Member Bradshaw?
As you all know, I've been keeping you up to date on the happenings at the South Davis Recreation District. I don't have any significant new updates for you. The Rec District Board has not yet made any determination on whether to move forward with plans for bonding. There's still a number of outstanding issues that board is discussing from different perspectives of still finalizing negotiations with North Salt Lake, to the expansion plans at the current site, and continued discussions on acquisition of field space west of I-15. So it hasn't yet reached the point where it's moved to a formal vote, and therefore we haven't advanced the further discussion of issues that impact Bountiful directly on 400 North Park. So it's an update by way of a non-update.
Thank you. Councilman Higginson.
Yeah, since we met last time, there have been two significant events in the city. I just wanted to thank those amazing volunteers who made those happen. First of all, the Chalk Art Festival. Secondly, the Rotary Coats for Kids car show, at which I was greeted by Miranda Hilton. I appreciated her saying hello. There with kids and grandkids, my kids and grandkids, her kids. Don't want you to think that Miranda has grandkids already. But sincere thanks to the council as well for recognizing those good programs, for doing a little bit on our end that gets leveraged huge by the organizations of those two groups, and makes such a nice event for the city. So all of you who had a hand in those, thank you. All of the volunteers who made those really happen, thanks to them. And what a great place to live. Bountiful's awesome.
Thank
That's all
you.
I have.
Excellent, thank you. Council Member Segura Bar.
I have nothing to report tonight.
Thanks. Council Member Price Hewish.
So I just have a report from the Bountiful Davis Arts Center, and they are fully in the middle of their Summerfest programming, which is an incredible program. It's going through the entire month of June, and it's every Monday night, beginning at 6 o'clock to 9 o'clock. And it has just been phenomenal. We've had all kinds of crazy weather on these Monday nights. It's been freezing cold and windy and super hot, and then last night was perfect. And lots, just referencing what my fellow council member Higginson said, we do have amazing volunteers. There are so many people who've showed up to help volunteers set it up, man the art yard, and do all these things. And there's just 1 week left, so if you haven't had a chance, go next Monday. They'll be highlighting Chinese culture. There will be dance and food and stories and activities. And it's a wonderful thing, and Bountiful City is the primary sponsor of Summerfest, and it takes place at our beautiful Bountiful Town Square Park. So that's all.
Thank you. Councilman Bell.
Not to be redundant, but I came prepared to share similar thoughts that Richard did. Speaking from the Service Council, I reached out to them earlier today. They had over 400 cars participate in the car show with the largest crowd that they've had to date. And they wanted to thank the Parks Department, the Police Department, the Fire Department in particular for all the facilitating and support that they received. And for those that don't know what the significance of the car show is this provides funds that the Rotary puts forward to scholarships at Bountiful High and Viewmont High, and provide coats and hats and gloves and warm clothing for the youth of our schools that's used through a voucher program that's very effective and wonderful resource for these kids that would go cold otherwise or could go be cold in our winter months. So wonderful activities, and our farmers market started up as well last week, and I had the opportunity to attend that, and what a great turnout there was. So we will have the opportunity to hear from our youth council here in a few minutes, but grateful that they're started up and new group of kids working together. Their first meeting was tonight, so.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And so now it is time for that youth council report. And I see that there's someone here to report, right? Great.
This is Kezia Holt.
Okay. Hi, my name is Kezia Holt. I am the new BCYC mayor. And this month we had our induction ceremony on June 7th, and today we had our first official meeting. And then this past month we also volunteered with the Kids Find Joy organization at the Chalk Art Festival, the Coalition That Cares by passing out resources for teen substance abuse, the Bountiful Rotary Club at Coats for Kids, and the total man hours we volunteered this month was 109. And then this upcoming month, we are planning to volunteer at the Handcart Day breakfast with South Davis Behavioral Health, and possibly participate in the Handcart Day parade. And do you have any questions for me? Okay.
May I just compliment the youth council? I was sitting at my son's baseball game last week when I saw all of you handing out the talking point card, or the talking points for the community that cares. And when you guys were walking around, and it was so fun to see you guys out and about and talking to people and handing out those things to help parents talk to their kids about substance abuse, and it was really amazing. And I think a little bird told me, I think you guys placed the stone in the town square for your BCYC tree. Is that right?
Yeah, we did.
So many good things, so well done.
Thank you. And then also, if the council has any volunteer opportunities, please reach out to Jesse about those. And thank you.
Thank you so much. We all really appreciate your efforts and all the good you do. So thank you. Okay, we will now consider approval of the expenditures greater than $1,000 and the April financial report.
Mayor, I'm happy to make a motion that we adopt those or approve those as printed.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion passes. Thanks. I'd like to insert that item now. Does that work, Gary? Okay, so we will revisit the topic now where we were discussing landscape ordinance, the discussion about landscape ordinance. And Cecily, I'm afraid Councilwoman Price-Hewish, I'm afraid I cut you off a little bit. So if there was any more you'd like to add, or anyone else, let's discuss this ordinance.
Well, thank you, Mayor. I actually do have just a couple more things to say in favor of the Flip Your Strip program. I think it's important also to note, in addition to this being an optional program that residents would have the opportunity to opt into, and not required, and the grandfathering, is that it's not adding an additional layer of enforcement onto the city. It's just changing. It's not additional, just different than what we have right now. And so in that way, coming into alignment, I believe, is not adding additional burden other than the actual changing of the ordinance. Also, on the second page of the staff report, it's laid out the requirements currently for minimum landscaping requirements for different zones in the city, and you'll see those 10, 15, and 40. Those are minimum levels required by the city to have landscaping. There are no turf requirements. We don't require a certain amount of turf in Bountiful City. Correct me if I'm wrong.
That is correct.
So coming into alignment with the Weber Water Basin Flip Your Strip program simply sets caps on that turf, on turf that would be allowed. And it's pretty minimal. I mean, it's not that different than what is already being minimally required by the city for these different types of landscaping. It's just setting minimum or maximum caps on turf that would be part of that landscape requirement. In addition to giving people a financial boost and incentive to do the right thing and put some vegetation instead of all rock, it will also additionally help people save money in the long run, as we know that our watering is going to be moving. Even our irrigation water will be moving to metering. We know that the legislature has mandated this. We're moving that way. This will help people get prepared for that eventuality, which is coming. We will save water. We will save money on maintenance of the grass. We are in this incredible drought and water shortage, and the limits that have been imposed this year by Bountiful Irrigation, we can help people be partners in the overall water outlook and entire water system. And if I'm not quoting this incorrectly, the average savings on this, just on the park strip alone, is 3,000 gallons of water annually. That's going back into the system, being preserved and reserved in the system for other uses. I just think this is being done in dozens of cities. I would love to see our city come into alignment with these responsible and very reasonable measures and help people save money and move their strip or flip their strip in a more economical way. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments?
I have a comment, and then I also have some questions for the staff based on the memo. The comment I have, it's not as much related to this memo, but related to what my colleague, Councilman Higginson, mentioned about observations of people replacing park strips with entirely rock. I have some concerns that we're not educating residents helpfully in what currently exists in terms of our zero escape ordinance, and that they may make changes that involve completely removing their access to irrigation lines underneath the sidewalk, so that if they want to then pursue rebates, they'll find that they're not able to. They don't have access to drip except for in a painful, costly way to reestablish that. And so my comment there is that I hope that we can, maybe through our social media efforts or our e-newsletter efforts, perhaps provide some visual examples so that those people that are feeling some desire to make changes right now, today, do so in a way that doesn't take them out of the running for any future rebates and keeps them in compliant with what currently exists. So that's my statement on that concern with where we're seeing and I think maybe perhaps we're seeing contractors that are engaging in some false advertising by perhaps telling a resident or outlining a plan that they can completely remove all the vegetation, remove all the sprinklers, replace with rock for a certain price point, and using the emotional appeal of the drought to market in a way that is not code compliant. Is it possible to put back up online Francisco's memo, staff memo, so that I can ask questions with some of the percentages that are listed? I just think it might be helpful if they're on the screen.
Absolutely. Here we go. This is the one without my 3 final options. I don't know what happened to that page.
That's okay. If you could scroll it to the second page of your report. Okay, I want to make sure I understand this correctly, so that we're able to make sure that we're comparing apples to apples. At the top, you have bullet points where you have our current city's required turf percentages,
Not turf, but landscaping.
landscaping.
Correct.
So right now, the Lakeview Hospital could have 10% landscaped, and they can choose.
That is a minimum.
Minimum.
Correct. And
But they could choose, they could
Correct.
have 2% in xeriscape
Correct.
and 8% in lawn, or vice versa.
Correct.
So if I were to refer to the first page of your memo,
And that percentage, I'm sorry to interrupt, but that percentage is based on the size of the lot.
yes.
you.
So if your lot's bigger, more, more
it's a percentage.
actual square footage,
Correct.
yes. So if, in reading the report on page 1 of your report, it looks like Weber Basin's system is probably more focused on just 2 categories: residential, category A, commercial, category B.
Everything else.
So assuming the hospital would be commercial category B,
Right.
that would change that percentage potentially of turf. It would double potentially the amount of turf that Lakeview Hospital could have. Am I understanding that correctly, or if I'm not?
No, no,
Okay,
no, no.
Please elaborate.
That 20% listed on the first page, it's a 20% of that 10%. So the 10% for the hospital is based on the size of the lot. So that gives me a minimum required area that has to be somehow landscaped through grass, turf, or xeriscape.
So in this example, we're just continuing to use our friendly community hospital, it would be 2%
Correct.
that they could do,
A maximum
maximum
of
of
grass.
2% of turf. So they would have to do
Correct.
their 18% in other landscaping.
Correct.
So, and then similarly for these other categories. Now, the mixed-use category, where it seems we're allowing a significant amount of flexibility for a trade-off on open space.
Yeah,
Help me understand then the
and-
changes here.
And I did leave one component out. I apologize about that, where the code does say that up to 50% of that, of the required open space can be hardscaped. So I hate it when the code does that to me. It's an inverse regulation. If 50% could be hardscaped, it means that the other 50% has to be landscaped. I'm trying to get rid of all those inverse regulations, but there is a clause that says that up to 50% of the required open space of the mixed use can be hardscaped. So it becomes a 7.5% maximum, if you will.
Okay, under the Weber Basin plan,
No, under the city
under
requirement.
the city required plan.
Correct.
So then, if we were to apply the Weber Basin 20% for
It would be
commercial,
20% of 7.5.
20% of 7.5.
Right.
So then the other thing I wanted to clarify from what you had said was that it seemed to me from your comments that Weber Basin is particularly concerned about residential and is willing to grant participating municipalities flexibility within their commercial codes. Did I understand that right?
Not just in the residential zones or areas, everywhere. They said this is the standard. If you're 1 or 2
This is
percentages.
the model, or?
Correct, the
Okay,
model.
so this is the model.
The model.
How much variance did they give?
It varies, as the mayor has researched that. In Layton, they did not put the provision of new park strips that would have a regulation that they couldn't have any grass. it's still in their sample ordinance, it's still in their write-up, which they expressly prohibit it. No turf grass is allowed in the park strip or areas where widths are less than 8 feet. Somehow Layton City was able to not have that restriction. I don't know if somebody missed it along the way. I don't know that yet, but the mayor has researched that. This is the language, again, this is not my write-up or my summary, this is Weber Basin's summary.
Because,
And they've included it once again.
because there seems to be perhaps a little flexibility, I just think it's worth asking the
Oh,
question
I don't disagree with that.
to say, you know, what if we allow X, Y, and Z? That's very similar to what our code is now, or
And-
I think it's worth the conversation.
And hypothetically, if council directed us to move on with the change, I would be in constant communication with Weber Basin. Hey, this is what we proposed, does it meet it? Hey, this is what the commission changed it, are we good? Hey, this is what the council's about to adopt, are we good? We would check in all along the way. We don't want to go through the exercise and then they say, no, you should have changed a percentage or two. So we would check in with them all along the way.
So I think my policy viewpoint to flow into the combination of staff directives is I don't have a ton of heartburn about reducing turf in the residential areas. I do worry a little bit about the commercial spaces, and in particular the mixed-use zone, not giving enough flexibility so that we can help some of those areas fit into our city better. We have sometimes struggles around high-density housing, and different neighborhoods sometimes struggle when properties that are higher density come into their neighborhoods, and it's my overarching kind of philosophy that retaining tools in the toolbox to help mitigate those impacts is important, and part of how we do that might be through making those spaces feel open and inviting and wanting to provide flexibility into that landscaping. So I think my preference would be to ask our planning commission to review our ordinance, review the model Weber Basin ordinance, and to think broadly about some of these other issues that landscaping helps us address in our zoning, and come back to us with a recommendation that then we might use as a negotiating point with Weber Basin.
I like that, Council Member Bradshaw, I like that approach. I would really like to see a side-by-side comparison of both codes, because in my I'm not an ordinance expert, but from my understanding is the Weber Basin Code is much more restrictive than what we have now. And it almost feels like we're turning the city into a giant HOA. And which there's pros and cons to that, but we had a big, long discussion last year about when we were talking about accessory dwelling units and how we don't dictate paint colors for houses. And so then I'm kind of like, well, why are we dictating vegetation for homes? And if we have restrictions in place or suggestions in place on watering, like you should or should not water, or you should only water this many times, then I feel like we can let people determine what they would or would not like to plant. I mean, and also I think at one point we saw how much money was really saved in the long run when it came down to the cost of actually doing the work and removing the plants and then installing new vegetation or whatever it was. I think, was it like $250 or $400 in cost in total? And granted, that's still a substantial amount of money. I'm not discarding that. But is that worth putting more restrictions on our residents when it comes to what they may or may not do on their own property? is my big picture question. Would you mind, can Gary address
Please.
that?
Sure.
Yeah, I wish, I'm afraid I don't have those numbers in front of us, but I can send them out again. Lloyd did an analysis, I think, of a 100-yard park strip and what the cost would be versus the rebate. And I seem to recall that, I mean, there was still a substantial cost. The rebate wouldn't, I think, covered less than a third of the cost of replacing the park strip. So I would hate for anybody in the audience to think that the rebate would cover the cost of flipping their strip to something that would be compliant even with Weber Basin's ordinance. It won't cover the cost.
So just to wrap that up, like I'm definitely not against people doing that. I'm just, do we put more restrictions on our residents with what they may or may not plant on their own property? So if a few residents who do choose to buy into this program can incur or can have, even if it's $500, $200, $1,000, is that worth giving up what people may or may not do on their own property? And that's how I'm approaching this. Maybe it is. But in my mind right now, I need to see a little bit more of a side-by-side as to what exactly, or maybe just a conversation with you, how this would shake out. Because again, I'm just kind of like, well, we don't tell people what they can paint their house. We don't have paint color restrictions, and we already have suggestions on watering. So doesn't that already negate the problem? If the big picture is so we can save water, that's our end goal, right? Is to conserve water. And then I feel like the secondary goal is to maybe help residents get a little bit more cash in their pockets through flip the strip. But does one trump the other? That's how I'm approaching this.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I did find the percentage that Lloyd did on a strip that's 80 feet long, 6 feet wide. It was 15% what Flip the Strip would cover. It was on April 12th.
15% of the total cost?
Correct.
So if it cost, give me some numbers. So like if it cost $2,000,
I had it right here.
it would make
$250.
$250? $300?
Right.
Okay.
And also food for thought, hospital zone is 53 acres. If we were to enact this, it would limit them the amount of grass to about 1 acre.
Mm-hmm.
If
And-
they were to have an addition.
Yeah, because I mean, it's little things like back to the, like, no turf grasses allowed on park strips or areas with widths less than 8 feet. Like, why?
Well, I think their logic is that there's inefficient sprinkling on park strips.
So this isn't oh, excuse me, I was thinking of this as artificial turf.
No.
No, this was regular turf. I was
Correct.
thinking artificial turf, excuse me. I retract my statement. Thank you for that number.
What other questions do you have, council?
I have a few thoughts. I agree with Council Member Segura-Barr in that we need to keep the big picture in mind. And in that light, I think it's really important, while the drought has brought this conversation to the forefront and our limited water use, that doesn't control our end goal. And I think our end goal is reduce water use. In my mind, it would be. But next year or 5 years or time down the road, we may not have any water restrictions. And that'll be a great day. And it'll allow us to water, how we desire. But I think also that there is, what this has also done is helped us all become more conscientious about our water use. It has for me and my home, and I think it has for many. I think for many, many years, decades, there's been, discussion of how do we reduce our landscape water usage, and being very deliberate. I think for quite some time we've put lawns in because we don't know what else to do, and this has given us an opportunity to be very deliberate about where we put grass and lawns, and where their highest and best use would be, while we're able to use less water with other types of landscape planting. And I think that's a commendable end goal. And so to me, I think it's worth studying your number 2 option that you presented, the 1, 2, and 3. I would be in favor of number 2 for those reasons. On page 24, on the page that's up on there, it has downtown and hospital zones as 10%. I would propose that we separate those. I think the hospital zone has a different feel and function than our downtown area does. And that kind of goes along the lines of what you just mentioned, is that would limit their grass to 10%. But I think that could be further studied and looked at in staff recommendations in the future. But that would be one area I would say to consider. And while we're looking at our landscape, I think the way it's written was great for the time that it was written. And these sorts of things evolve and change. And I've heard that ordinance is about 16 years old, and I think that it was very proactive at that time. And while giving residents flexibility, I think that gives us an opportunity to revisit that. And I would say we need to incorporate more tree growth, more tree opportunities, surprisingly, in that landscape ordinance. The other thing I might just say is that for most of our lives, we've had the mentality that if we don't use the water, it's just going to go down and be wasted, go downstream and be wasted. And I think we're starting to change that water that we don't use that goes downstream does have value, and it's not wasted, and it's needed ecologically and helps support our Great Salt Lake. And that's another reason I'd like to continue to support more water-wise landscape. Anyway, that's all I have.
Mayor, could I comment
Yes,
again?
sure.
During Councilmember Price Huish's comments, she said 2 things that I think need a response, probably unintended. That the folks that are wanting to participate in the Flip the Strip program are doing the right thing, and also later doing the responsible thing. I would just point out that there are dozens and dozens of ways to conserve and do the right thing without participating in that program. And I wouldn't want those residents who are trying their best to do their part to conserve that are not flipping their strip are also recognized as trying to do the right thing and the responsible thing. So, thanks.
Thank you, Councilman Higginson. That is a good point and a fair point. And you're right, there are many, many ways to do a good thing, a responsible thing, and the right thing. So that is a point well taken. But this fits within, flipping your strip fits within the umbrella of doing a good thing and a responsible thing. It's one of many ways to skin a cat. And so I just want to make a couple of additional comments, and then I promise, Mayor, I will be done. But I think it's even possible that with the Flip the Strip program, the Flip the Strip program looks at irrigable space on a property, and that would be, property by property, but it's possible that the irrigable space might even end up allowing for greater turf coverage than our current minimum landscaping requirements allow. So I'm just saying that it's possibility. I mean, that's gonna be something on a case by case, because if you're looking at total irrigable space, you would have, in the case of a single-family dwelling, 35% of total irrigable space could be utilized for turf. So, and we look on here and we look at residential multifamily, that's 40%. Well, okay, in that case, no, but you're looking at 40% of total acreage or total square footage. We don't know of that what is irrigable, because a driveway's not irrigable, a sidewalk's not irrigable.
Correct.
A approach to a home is not irrigable. So I'm just saying it could be more similar than different. But the percentages of turf don't eliminate other landscaping requirements or opportunities. And to Councilwoman Bradshaw's comment, our developers in the city currently have no carrots or mandates to use turf. They're not required to use turf, and they're just required to meet these minimum landscaping requirements. So I think the most important thing is to have responsible landscaping in whatever way that is. We want it to be beautiful. We know that. We love the beauty of our city. We want it to be inviting. That's something that's important to us as Bountiful residents. But I agree with Councilman Bell's statement that water is a common and societal resource. It is not something that is just accrues as a single property right, like painting your home or brick or shingles. It's a societal resources. It's limited. It's finite, and it brings all of us societal utility. And looking at the state website about Flip Your Strip, 50% of water this is estimates by the state of Utah, 50% of water that is used on park strips is a waste. It goes down the street, it goes down the sidewalks. It's just a complete waste. This isn't a requirement, it's an option. It gives people, in my opinion, more options, especially because of the grandfathering allowances for those people. Just did a quick calculation for that 80-foot park strip. It's $600. I know somebody who just flipped their strip for much less than that because they put their turf on Facebook Marketplace, had somebody who needed a backyard came and took their turf to put it in their backyard space, and that allowed them to not have to accrue that expense. And again, that's the beauty of being a city, Councilman Bell, is we are flexible. We are not the legislature or the federal government. We could change our ordinance now for what is appropriate now, and we could change it in 10 years if we then find ourselves in a different water outlook situation. And anyway, that's all, and I will end my comments there. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you so much. Anyone else? So I just want to note that in Layton's ordinance, they say, one of their points says it's highly recommended but not required that single-family residential properties install a water-wise landscape using the following elements. So part of their ordinance says it's highly recommended but not required. And so that's just an example of why I'm hoping we can just look into what the flexibility may be to see if we are somewhat close even with what we currently ask residents. And so I just wanted to, we don't need a motion on this because it's a work session item, but just wanted to see with the council if there's an appetite to have the Planning Commission evaluate our ordinance. What are your thoughts?
I definitely think it's worth exploring. I just want to be sure that we're keeping the big picture in mind.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Sorry, can we,
Yes.
for the help of staff and the planning commission, it would be helpful to have direction. Do you want them to mirror an ordinance that would comply with Weber Basin so residents can receive the strip, or do you want them to take an independent look and on what they think is just in the best interest of Bountiful based on what they feel? That would be really helpful if you could tell us.
My feeling is flip your strip as a secondary goal, not a primary goal. I know that's maybe vague, but I think having that incentive and potential is great, but that's not the purpose of the ordinance in my mind.
And I'm sorry, what would the purpose be? You said that would be secondary, so what would
So
the
to
primary
look at
goal would be?
water-wise
Water-wise.
and beautification, keeping our city beautiful, if we allow everybody to go through and turn all their park strips to rock, I don't think that is, in my mind, a healthy city practice in years to come. That's very short-sighted in my mind.
So does anyone else agree with, I was gonna say Commissioner, Councilmember Bell,
So
or not?
I think Gary, as Gary articulated, there were, the way he framed it in the two questions, either referring to the planning commission for them to revise our ordinance to match the model Weber Basin ordinance, or to give an independent review of our zero-escape ordinance and recommend changes that may or may not match the model ordinance. If that's options 1 and 2, I come down on option 2 and wanting them to review and think holistically about our landscaping ordinance and our whether matching the Weber Basin model ordinance helps us accommodate some of these other the goals of water conservation, but some of these other goals related to our commercial areas and our mixed-use zones and a lot of our multifamily is in mixed-use zones, and so I would like their independent analysis of if that model ordinance is the best for Bountiful, or would they recommend something else? Because I think that leads to an option 3, which is then to negotiate with Weber Basin to perhaps accept something slightly modified that works best for Bountiful, all of Bountiful's zones.
And may I add on to that? Maybe it's just because I didn't follow this closely enough, but has anyone asked the question why and I'm sure people have, why the state wrote the flip the strip rebate in such a way that people who simply do it can't get the rebate?
Yeah, we don't know that.
That's my biggest frustration, is that, I think people should be able to do what they want, and they should just be able to get the rebate without a city having to change their ordinance so that people can get the rebate.
Yeah, it's not the state, it's Weber Basin, and I think.
Excuse me, that's what I meant, Weber Basin, excuse
And I
me.
think their logic was, we want you to do it right. If you did it already, say back in 2008, as a city allowed to, great. You don't get any money. We already got what we needed. We got efficient sprinklers in the park strip. We're good to go. So I think they're trying to make more out of their limited resources. Simply, they will not collaborate with you if you've already removed the grass from the park strip. They will not work with you. They have to physically go on site and take pictures of that green grass before they let you in the program. I could ask point blank,
Yeah,
but I don't know the answer
I just
other than
point
that.
blank want to know why I feel like we're kind of being strong-armed into something that may or may not be appropriate for the city long-term. And so that's, my beef, if
And that's
you will.
exactly why we're having this policy
Yeah,
discussion with you.
So if I agree, I like option 2, but when we do the comparison, could we see a side-by-side of our current code and the percentages, and then the proposed code percentages, just so
Yeah.
we can, especially for people who are listening in or attending the meeting, so they can get a full, big picture?
Absolutely. We could even provide a sampling of a minimum lot size and what actual it would mean to have a 35% maximum restriction on grass.
That'd be great.
Thank
That
you.
would be helpful, especially because I think we're not comparing totally apples to apples.
Right.
It's irrigable space versus total lot size. And I sense that it is not in the council's, besides mine, appetite tonight to move forward with this issue as a council, but I stated that incorrectly. Move forward, but in a different way, right? Okay, move forward in a different way, then move it to the Planning Commission, which I think is totally appropriate, but I would ask that we ask the Planning Commission to specifically look at and review the flip your strip delineated
Right.
factors, and that it's,
It sounds like
in addition to things Councilmember Bell
It
mentioned.
sounds like the appetite of the council is to move forward, looking at the current ordinance and looking ahead at water conservation measures, and if there are things that that we feel like should be changed, and then the flip your strip could be a secondary factor if we also are able to negotiate or meet the guidelines they have. So any other direction for Francisco, just to make sure we're clear on what we're asking for?
I have to ask a question.
Yes.
When you say go to the planning commission, that means go through the process, correct? Set up the public hearing, write the ordinance? Because to have the planning commission truly provide an independent opinion would most likely take 2 meetings. One is more of a work session scenario like this, and then coming back with, all right, I've heard what you request. I now need to go back and write the ordinance or the proposed ordinance. Is that what we're referring to by independent?
Yeah.
I
well,
would resist, I would say no. I would
has-
say,
It has to be.
why can't
If
they?
we're going to amend the landscape ordinance, it has to go through the planning commission.
I don't think we're asking them to amend the landscape ordinance. I think we're asking them to come back to us with some recommendations that we might then use as negotiating points with Weber Basin that then would inform an ordinance. But
Okay,
I,
that's not what I understood, so that's good clarification.
No, I completely agree with Councilmember Bradshaw. I think that the process could be as easy as you review the landscape ordinance with the planning commission, ask them for their input, and maybe let them stew on it for a meeting or two. But then ask them for recommendations on areas where they see we could improve flexibility or whatever on water-wise landscaping. Review these percentages, see if their opinion is that maybe we need to look at it. Bring us their opinion, and then let's talk about whether or not we want to request an ordinance change with them. Does that mesh with what you're saying?
that matches with what I was, had in mind.
Okay. Any other
I do have
thoughts?
one potentially helpful request.
Okay.
I'm reminded that when we were doing the updated ordinance for accessory structures, some of us are visual learners. And it was very helpful when the staff used real bountiful properties that we've all walked and driven by, and showed us where those lines would be on different setbacks. To Councilwoman Price Hewish's comments wanting to make sure that we are thoughtful about irrigable space versus total lot size. Perhaps it would be helpful with whatever the Planning Commission recommends that the staff could using Google Earth, grab a couple properties, we can, and then shade them in the ways where they would be impacted under the Weber Basin ordinance, our existing ordinance, and whatever the opinion, short of an ordinance, of the Planning Commission is, so that we can see a couple visual examples of commercial, mixed-use, residential properties around town. And my apologies to whoever's home might get used as examples. I guess
Thank you.
You can use mine.
I'm sure they're happy to have their home showcased. Can I piggyback off your comments again, Mayor? Could I?
Please.
Also, if we could, as Councilmember Bradshaw mentioned earlier, maybe get a couple of pictures on the city website that show examples of how park strips are supposed to be xeriscaped, so that folks who are visual learners can see that it's not just ordering a truckload of gravel from your local gravel supplier. There are other things involved. So, is
Yes.
that possible, Gary?
Oh, yeah, and I'm sorry, you asked for that like a month and a half ago, and it's my fault for not
That's a
showing
good
up there. I'm
suggestion.
sorry.
It's my fault. Gary did talk to me about that.
Thank you. So do you feel like you have adequate direction?
Yes,
Okay.
I do.
Everyone good with that? Thank you. Okay, we will now move to consider
Just have to get a little whoop.
for adoption the fiscal year 2022 amended budget and fiscal year 2023 final budget with related items. Mr. Galen Rasmussen.
Thank you, Mayor and members of the council. Give me a minute to get this set up, and I can get a presentation up before you. Tonight is the end point of a very long process that you've all been involved with, and getting this budget reviewed. And we are governed by what the state law requires us to do in Title 10 of the state law that governs budgets for cities. And so had to take a minute to type in my password there, so let me get this presentation up and running. Yep, it should, it's on screen, so there we go. And so tonight is to bring in one package for your consideration, as well as for the public to see what has been discussed and what has been finalized for final adoption tonight as our city's budget that would start July 1st and go to June 30 of 2023. And also, in the midst of the meetings tonight, we would also have for consideration amendments to our current year budget that ends on June 30th, along with adopting a property tax rate and some other things that go along with that. So let me just go ahead and start that presentation. This is just kind of the timetable I just mentioned. We start as a staff in January to put together estimates and to get things prepared so that we can discuss as a staff what our needs are, what our available revenues might be, and then have a chance to visit with our departments after they prepare their budgets, and then bring that all together in the April timeframe, usually for you to take a look at in your individual committees, which you've all gone through. And that has taken place. We're now past the tentative budget, which by law you have to adopt the first meeting in May, which we have done that. And now we're on June 21st, and it's time to consider those items of reopening the current year budget for consideration of amendments, having a couple of hearings on transfers that are planned in the budget, one transfer from the power department to the general fund, and then another to be coming from the landfill fund to the recycling fund, and then a public hearing to consider the budget and those amendments. So that is where we're at tonight. As you know, as our budget is based every year on the existing policy priorities that you have established in the past, and those are currently under evaluation. You've had a couple of meetings where you've discussed what your desires are for adopting new priorities, revising the ones that are currently there. And along the way, with the committee hearings you've had, these consideration of these policy priorities, the budget is based upon that as a guiding force to move things along. And speaking about the budget tonight, fiscal year 2023 that begins July 1st, this budget, as all of our budgets are balanced with revenues and expenses because we can't print money. We have to make sure we have funds to take care of things, as well as that we spend, it matches exactly. Those policy priorities are the governing point. There is no property tax increase proposed. The slide that I have in there is actually mentioning a $3.6 million budgeted revenue. I actually put in the wrong slide on that one because the amount of money that we got from the certified tax rate is a little bit different than that. It's about $42,000 more than that. And then the fee increases that are in the budget are outlined there. There's various fee increases in engineering and planning, which we went over with you in the retreat that was in January. So you had a chance to look at those, and those have been adopted separately in another meeting of this body. There's a stormwater fee increase of 50 cents per equivalent residential unit, a power rate increase of 3%, and then some adjustments in rates in the cemetery. We also have in all of the budgets from each of the departments a 3% cost of living for salaries of individuals in those departments, merit increases, and then there are some market adjustments that were done for various classes of employees. And we do that each year to keep the positions competitive with other like entities and compare ourselves with that. We have a 4% increase in our medical insurance this year, and there's a couple of new positions in the budget, one that's a full-time position in landfill and one in sanitation. Just as a review for the individuals here in the audience as well as the council, just a few slides to go over where our money comes from and where it goes. So the money that we have for all funds combined, we have our tax-supported funds, we have our enterprise funds, which are business-like. That would be our electricity, water, and so forth. And then our tax-supported funds, our police and streets and otherwise. So the sources of money come from primarily user fees. So about 52% is from user fees, about 23% from taxes, and then a variety of other sources. Looking at that in a spreadsheet format, that's how that comes in and how it's allocated by the different funds of the city. The money, where it goes now for all funds combined, we have primarily three places it goes. Operations and maintenance, so that could be anything from our utility costs that we pay, it could be maintenance agreements we have, it could be fuel, and those types of things. Personnel services, all of our costs for employees, including salaries, retirement taxes, and so forth. And then our capital expenditures, which change each year based on the adopted long-term capital plan that is part of the budget. And then there's the other items there that are of lesser percentage. And then again, looking at that in another format. Drilling down a little bit more into the expenditures, where they come from in each of the departments. Our light and power and water fund and our enterprise funds make up the bulk of the expenditures, as you might expect. And light and power being the largest of the enterprise funds. And on the tax-supported side, our public safety and our public works being the largest uses of the budget dollars there. And showing it in a table format for those that would like to look at the dollars. Looking at a summary in this slide here and the one that follows are in the budget document itself that is out on the website now in tentative form. This would be the final budget that you would adopt or consider adopting tonight. This is the revenue side of the house, and it I've got you one slide ahead there. I've got revenue side here that shows all those sources and which areas they apply to, for a total of, in this final budget, after transfers back and forth between funds, of just over $75 million, $75,076,328. On the expense side, these are the different line items that this applies to here in each of those categories. Looking at some of our taxes in more detail, the sales tax and gasoline tax rates are here for you to take a look at, and the percentages that Banifal takes of that. We have the local option sales tax, which is the 1%, our RAP tax, that's 0.10, and then we have the mass transit taxes and other things that are part of the whole package that you would pay when you go to a store. And then we have our gasoline tax, and there's the components that the federal government takes and the state government. And we receive Class C road funds from these funds, and they're based on 50% road miles and 50% population. We get it every other month, and that's how that comes in. It helps to fund our roads and other things related to that. Looking at our electric rates and how we compare with Rocky Mountain Power, our rates are not seasonal, so we have the same rate all year long, whereas Rocky Mountain Power has rates for summer and winter. But when you average those out, what it turns out to with this rate increase that's embedded at the 3% is that our average customer in the city is actually 1.9% less on an annual basis than what they would be under Rocky Mountain Power. So that is how that averages out. And our power department is gracious enough to put that slide together for me from their studies of the customers and their services to them. Now, just looking at each of the major funds, just to give you an idea of the total there for the public, our power department, being the largest enterprise fund, is just under $31 million in this new budget. Water department, $5.5 million. Our streets department, $7.6 million, including everything from snow plowing, resurfacing, all the things that they do that way. Sanitation and landfill combined, even though they're separate funds, $4.2 million. In the general fund with tax services, police for $10.4 million, and fire and EMS services, $2.5 million, which is a contracted, which is a service which we all participate in with the South Davis Fire. Our stormwater fund, $2.3 million, and then finally cemetery, $578,200. From our tentative adoption of our budget, you've seen this slide before, how we received requests for funding for the RAP tax funds and the entities that asked for funding and how that was recommended. And that was based on their things they were asking for and what was eligible in the policies that we have for granting funds there. And then also some reallocations of funds to other purposes, which we talked about during the tentative adoption. One thing that we did do a revision on this year for that we are proposing, and it'll be part of the final budget, is our change in our fund balance and reserves policy. And that was due to a couple of things. There was some housekeeping items about changing the references to what used to be the Comprehensive Annual Financial Report, or CAFR, which is now the Annual Comprehensive Financial Report, or ACFR. So we just made that change. And then a couple of references within the Capital Projects Fund Reserve and Enterprise Funds Reserve, which allowed for exclusion of those projects that had a funding source from the calculations, made some modifications there. I provided in your staff report the entire reserves policy with these changes in it. And I neglected to mention the first one, which was a change based on the change in the law that would allow us to reserve between 30 and 35% rather than 23 and 25% as it was before. So that just allows us to be able to accumulate that. Just wanted you to be aware of those. Now, Tyson is the architect of this one, and so he is here if you have specific questions about that. But that is what the summary of those changes would be.
Galen, may I just offer
You bet.
some insight? The intent of those two paragraphs about not including the 75% is to make sure that we're not accidentally overstating our expenditures and therefore hastening the period of time in which we need a tax increase. Sometimes we'll make expenditures, for example, to purchase property that we may then turn around and sell. That's a little bit different than this, but there are other situations where we'll make an expenditure out of the capital projects fund. We just don't want to overstate those expenditures so that it looks like we need a property tax increase sooner than we actually do, if that makes sense.
A summary of the action that the council we're asking you to take tonight. There's several public hearings we need to hold. First would be our annual transfer from the power fund to the general fund, and then a public hearing on the transfer from the landfill fund to the recycling fund, and then a public hearing finally on our amendments to our current year budget and our new year budget adoption. And that would be by ordinance 2022-06, and that would include also adoption of our property tax rates. And so, Mayor, if it's okay, I would take us through kind of a little introduction on the first public hearing and then have you open that at the appropriate time. That'd be okay? Talking first about our administrative services reimbursement. The funds of the city that are tax supported provide services to our enterprise funds. Things such as employee payroll, which we pay our employees. We take care of their accounting. We take care of their computers, provide insurance and legal support and all the things that they would rely upon. If they didn't have that within house, they would have to contract for it out just like a private business would. And so by doing that, the state law as well as accounting requirements impose upon us the requirement to bill them, if you will, internally for those services. And so what Tyson does is he prepares along with Shannon and myself, a billing of what our value of our services are provided to them. So a share of Shannon's time, my time, Gary's, Clint's, number of different departments, and what they're doing for these funds. And then we allocate that to those funds of the city. And then they pay back in a like manner from their enterprise funds to the general fund to compensate us for those services. And so this is just a showing of both sides of that. The administrative services charge to each of those enterprise funds totaling $1,585,393 in the new fiscal year, and then the balancing figures by each of those departments that provide the services. And so that just needs to be disclosed, and this is one of the disclosures that we make early on in the process that we put on our website, and that is part of the adopted budget as well. Now, to the first transfer that would be subject to a public hearing, the Light and Power Fund transfers, and has done for many, many years, a transfer annually to the general fund, which is done monthly by the accounting department. I've shown the projected transfer, the impact that that has upon budgeted expenses in the power fund by doing this transfer. The transfer amount in fiscal year 2023 is $2,582,080, and that's 8.4% of the budgeted expenses. I show both the final budget and the tentative budget because there were a few adjustments, and just wanted to make sure that that was transparent. So you can see that graphically. Now, looking at what we've done over the years from the fiscal year 2000 period forward, it has dropped from 15% of metered sales down to 10%. And so that was a decision of the council and management to do that over the years based on what needs were. And in the current fiscal year, as well as in the fiscal year 23, which we're proposing, it is again 10%. These funds do actually provide for the essential services that we have, police, fire, street maintenance, and so forth. It allows some non-property taxpayers to be able to actually contribute for the services they're receiving. Some of the not-for-profit entities, government services, or government entities around us that don't pay property tax but still receive services, we can receive some tax support from them by this transfer. It keeps property taxes in Bountiful low, relatively speaking. We would have to increase our property tax rate dramatically if we didn't have this transfer. And again, it represents 8.4% of the budget expenses of the Light and Power Fund. And you can review it as maybe a consideration as a dividend back to the city and the taxpayers for that investment that's been made in the Power Fund over the years. So, Mayor, with that, I would turn it over to you to open a public hearing.
Excellent. Thank you so much. We would now like to hold a public hearing on the fiscal year 2023 transfer of funds from Light and Power Fund to the General Fund. Anyone wishing to speak to that, please come up, state your name, address, and whatever you'd like to say. Okay, seeing no one to speak to that motion, we will turn the time back over to Mr. Rasmussen.
Mayor, could I ask for a minute just to
Sure.
make a comment about the Power Fund
Yeah,
transfer?
please.
I just want to reiterate for folks that what I think is the real beauty of this arrangement. Residents in Bountiful get lower cost power, more reliable power, locally controlled power, and by the way, significantly better percentage of renewable power than they would have if we were with the local other major provider. In addition, the residents get a dividend back that keeps their property taxes low and helps everyone in Bountiful who's using power share the cost of services that are provided to folks. It's such a blessing to the city for us to be able to have this. And I don't think that we can say it too many times that it needs to be essentially shouted from the rooftops that this is such a great arrangement. And we've never misused the funds, as some other cities were accused of doing, and were shut down from their transfer. It has always been done responsibly here. It has always been done to benefit residents here. And I'm really hoping that it can continue in the future. So a beautiful thing.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Okay, we will turn it back over to you, Galen.
Okay. Next transfer to go over and to open a public hearing on eventually would be the transfer that we make from the landfill to the recycling fund. And this shows graphically and in number form the transfer amount. And the transfer amount is $75,000 this year in the upcoming 2023 year, which is 2.7% of the budget expenses of the landfill fund. This transfer is to help subsidize the operations, as we've done this transfer for a couple of years now. And it helps to avoid a fee increase to our customers during which we hope will be a kind of a difficult but short recycling market problem that's out there. Again, it's 2.7% of the total budgeted expenses of the landfill. And the interest earnings of the landfill mostly, if not all the way, cover the cost. And that is a good way to look at that. And again, Mayor, open for public comment.
Excellent. Anyone here that would like to speak to the fiscal year 2023 transfer of funds from the landfill fund to the recycling fund, please come, state your name, address, and your comments, please. Okay, seeing none, we will turn the time back over to you, Galen.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. Now just taking a look at our property tax more in detail. Here in this graph is a representation of the percentage of your total property tax dollar and where it goes. Who gets those pieces of your property tax dollar. The school district is the largest entity that receives those funds. And then along with the county and the county library. And then it's followed down with between Baniful's general property tax rate, which is 9% of the total, and 2%, which will now be the debt service percentage on the $8 million bond that the voters voted on in 2020, which will be issued here this month. The total would be about 11% from Baniful. And so that gives you kind of an idea there of what the percentages of each of the entities take from that. Looking at the rates in particular and how we compare with others, this chart is sorted on the first column, the city tax rate, from highest to lowest, and then Baniful being at the very, very bottom, and then just above it an average of those cities. And Baniful, as you can see, is the third from the lowest of the cities represented in the county, with the combined rate of the taxes that would be for our general purposes as well as our debt service of 0.00967. And so that kind of gives you an idea there. We did put in the other taxing rates so that you can see kind of a representative comparison rate of each of those entities. Looking at what an average property owner in Baniful, based on a $574,000 home, would pay, the fiscal year 2023 or calendar year 2022 taxes.
Galen,
Yes.
can I interrupt you? Mayor,
Sure.
can I ask a question? Does that last graph or chart that you had up show the property tax increases that are currently proposed in various cities around Davis County? Because I know there are a number of them.
Yeah, there, as of the date I pulled the data, there could still be some that had not locked in yet.
Okay.
And so probably not all of them. This is what was proposed as of the date I pulled it, which was, I believe, mid last week.
Thank you.
May I ask a second question
Sure.
regarding this graph?
Mhm.
Would it be completely inappropriate if our city had this on our website?
No.
I just think this is great and speaks
Yeah.
so well of the way our city is managed. I think it would be useful for residents who, when they are looking at taxes and seeing how their funds are parceled out, I think it would be useful for them to see just this, it speaks volumes, so.
Yeah, we can do that. You bet. In fact, during times when we're considering a tax increase, we oftentimes will post it out there at least for a time. But this is something, yeah, we could do ongoing.
If my colleagues are amenable to that.
100%.
Great idea.
Speaking now to the individual taxpayers' situation and how each of these tax rates affect them. $574,000 home is what the county is saying is our average home value in the county, in the city right now. And so seeing this chart, it mentions once you take the residential exemption of 45% off of that, that the taxes due on this size of a home would be $2,593. And Bountiful represents $236 of that for the general certified rate and $44 for the debt service portion. So that is what the average homeowner would pay in that. And so in summary, our property tax with no increase this year between the debt service amount and the regular amount is $4.3 million. And again, the average homeowner's payment would be those two figures there, $236 and $44. And that brings us to a public hearing that we would need to hold on our amending of our current fiscal year and then also adopting our current or our final budget for 2023 along with our property tax rate. Just going over the amendments that we're showing for each of the funds. And I apologize, it's probably a little small, but it's that big when you print it. So it's like a horse blanket, but that's okay. But I could be glad to answer any questions in regards to those. But this schedule shows our general fund, our capital fund, the departments that are requesting amendments, and where those funds are coming from. And you have a copy of this in your staff report as well to take a look at. Hopefully it'll be a little bit easier to see without a magnifying glass. So those are the amendments that are being requested and are balanced with revenues or transfers. Just to bring a synopsis of the budget again, fiscal year 2023, the upcoming budget is $75,076,328 of net revenues and net expenses and expenditures. And then the budget amendments, as I just showed, and then a revision to our fund balance reserve policies that we outlined before. And Mayor, again, would just open for a public hearing.
Thank you so much. We would like to open a public hearing now to hear any thoughts you might have about fiscal year 2022 amended budget and the fiscal year 2023 final budget. Please, if anyone has any comments, please come up. Seeing none, we will turn the time back over to you, Galen.
Okay, thank you. Okay, the council action then needed tonight following this presentation would be to, for our staff recommendation for you to adopt ordinance 2206, and that covers the amendments we just discussed for the current fiscal year, the fiscal year 2023 budget we've just outlined, the rates and user fees and charges, the long-term capital plan that outlines what we're planning to do over 10 fiscal years, revised fund balance policies, and then all related items, including adoption of the electric service rates and policies that are part of the budget for the power department, and our participation in the Utah Retirement Systems system as well. And be glad to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you so much. This, just for the public, this is a process that we've been working on for months. We've had lots of budget meetings for each department and have looked at each line item. So it's a long process and we really appreciate Galen and Tyson and Gary and all of our department heads for all their input and work on this. One question I had was, when we look at the general fund reserve target level, I'm just wondering if we would want to consider, so we're considering increasing the unrestricted fund balance, and I know that we're allowed to have up to 35%, but I'm just wondering if we would want to consider a greater range between what it was, 23 and 35%, so that it just gives us more flexibility, perhaps making it a little harder to trigger the need for a property tax increase, or I just wanted to see what your thoughts were on that, and any council members or Tyson or anyone, I'd like to hear your thoughts.
So just leaving it at 23, but having it be a greater range than 23 to 35? 35 is the maximum that we're allowed by state law.
Yeah.
But yeah, it could be left at 23.
I just wondered if
Amazing.
that would give more flexibility.
A major reason we received our rating that we did from the bonding agency is because we have our reserve at the maximum allowed by the state. They specifically mentioned that and looked at our history, that for the prior years, we had maintained that general fund maximum. And so we wouldn't recommend doing anything below the maximum amount. It will affect our bond rating.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm just thinking that if we had a little lower bottom on that, then we would have, it wouldn't preclude us from having the maximum amount. So I'm just wondering, if, I understand what you're saying, that we want to have the maximum for things like bond ratings, but in an emergency or something, I'm just wondering if it might be wise to have some flexibility there, but.
So the minimum is required by state law. That 23% is we can't keep less than that. And so we have to be somewhere between 23 and 35. And the intent of having it as high as possible is in the event of an emergency, we can use those funds for something. It really falls into part of our rainy day fund that goes along with our capital projects fund. So did that answer your question?
Yeah. Any other discussion about that or anything else?
I'd be happy to share a thought,
Sure.
and that is that we continue the policies that will save residents money over time, and that is to have the maximum amount allowable in our reserve fund.
Thanks. Any other thoughts or questions about the budget?
Can I?
Can I just
Oh,
have
sorry.
I want to just clarify what you just said. So the reserve fund, you're saying, is the rainy day fund?
So
Is that what you just said?
not exactly.
Okay,
So
just, can you clarify that?
Yeah, absolutely, and it's a great question. And Utah's different than most states. Most states don't have a cap on the amount of money that you can keep in reserve in your general fund, but our state legislature has decided that we should cap the amount of rainy day money we keep in our general fund. Now that creates a problem for rating agencies because we don't have nearly as much money in our general fund saved that everybody else in the rest of the country does. So to make sure that we have enough reserves, what in Utah cities do is they keep an additional balance in their capital projects fund. And so state law allows up to 35% of budgeted revenues in the general fund, and then on top of that, that's the city council adopted policy that says that we will also maintain $12 million plus the average of 2 years capital expenditures in reserves. So it's really the combination of the 35% in the general fund and our fund reserve policy in the capital projects fund that constitute our rainy day fund. It's both of those. And I just can't emphasize enough how impressive that was to Moody's, how important that was, that we have both those. And that a couple of years ago, or last year, that when we were projecting needing to do a property tax increase based on our policy, that we took action. Those were both key components of this bond rating. So, and the bond rating doesn't stay; they review it as long as we have the bond. How frequently is it? Every year?
A couple of years.
At least every 2 years.
They call it a surveillance thing.
So that bond rating can go up or down and affect the city's credit outlook for additional bonds, and so it's just important that we maintain the practices. Did that answer your question, Councilmember? Uh-huh.
What other questions do you have, Council?
How about another shout out after Councilmember Bradshaw
I
opines?
was thinking along those same lines.
Oh, beautiful.
And I was also going to add an observation that I personally, since I spend a significant amount of time up at the state capitol for my day job, have always found it interesting that the state can have unlimited amounts in their rainy day funds, of which they have a couple for the income tax fund and the general fund, and then associated other restricted accounts for different things. So the state is able to very appropriately save for those rainy days. But there has always been this philosophy that that cities maybe aren't as good at doing that, and so the state ought to cap them in some way. And as we have gone through interesting turbulent times the last 2 years, and I hope that we aren't headed that way into more turbulent times. I've just always found that inconsistency of no caps on the state legislature's rainy day funds, but caps on the cities to just be a little bit ironic, given that we face the same pressures of the ballot box to be prudent stewards of tax dollars. I'm very excited that we've received such a great bond rating. I don't personally have heartburn with the proposed percentages, so I'll leave that there. As to the kudos I mentioned, I felt like we should pay. We were very profusive in our praise of all of those that have worked on the Trails Fund, or on the Trails Implementation Plan. The budget process, it's equally long. It repeats on an annual basis. It involves many meetings that we attend, but so many more meetings that the staff attends, and then lots of one-on-one coaching time for those of us that are need pictures versus spreadsheets. And so I have appreciated that, and I think there is great kudos that are owed. There are some of our residents who are here tonight that have attended many city council meetings, and so are probably aware of the different times this has been discussed. Some that might be first-time attendees and are thinking, wow, that's a lot of information and a big dollar amount to take place in a short presentation. But I think a lot of credit is owed that as soon as this budget cycle closes and Galen mails us our final budget spreadsheets, he will set that aside. Maybe he'll get a couple days rest, and then he will begin the work of the building blocks of the next year's budget. And it is one of the most critical things that I think we do in setting a budget for our city. And we stand on the shoulders of people who, from the staff and elected side, who thoughtfully put forward policies involving the power department, involving an overall pay-as-you-go mentality, and many other policies that our residents benefit from now and that make us look good up here but are not actually our own doing. And so many credits are owed that just because they're numbers and graphs, they might not, I might not frame the budget in the same way I want to frame the trails map. But I will find it a prominent space on a shelf, Galen, because it is so important that stewardship of dollars is an important consideration. Can you improve upon that, Councilman Higginson? Because I'm sure I've left something off.
I was just sitting here lamenting the fact that I couldn't come close to touching that. That was beautiful. Thanks.
Can I also just mention that, as Kate mentioned, that we've gone through a long and extensive budget process, and all of those meetings were notified and advertised to the public. The public came and participated or listened, and those were open meetings, and this isn't the first time this information's been presented publicly either.
Thanks. Any other questions or comments from the council?
One other comment, if I could. I just want to point out this one instance. The recycling market crashed several years ago. And if this city staff or if this city council was interested in nickel and diming residents to death with unnecessary fee increases, it would have been a prime opportunity for us to raise our recycling fees, perfectly justified. But instead, staff thought, you know what? We're earning interest on the mandatory reserve balance for that fund. Let's just go ahead and spend that instead of hitting residents with more money or more raised fees. And the recycling markets will rebound, which we're seeing by the reduction in that transfer each year, that those markets are rebounding. And so residents didn't have to have a fee increase, and the city is taking care of little things like that all the time. I appreciate staff for that idea, and I appreciate this council for recognizing the opportunity to not raise fees and passing that along to the residents. So, thanks.
Thank you.
If I may, Mayor, since we're all talking about this budget, I've now had the opportunity to sit through 2 budget cycles, and I have learned so much. And I wish more people would attend those meetings, because it really has given me a huge insight into how the city runs and how vigilant our staff is in looking for ways to save our residents money. And not only that, but how responsible our staff is in spending those dollars, because I think it's safe to say that everyone on the staff, they see these tax dollars as, I mean, I don't want to be over mushy, but as sacred funds. It's a big deal, and it's money that people have worked for, and it's money that people are giving to our stewardship to spend wisely. And I've been very impressed and in how that entire process from beginning to end. And so thank you for taking it so seriously, not only as a profession, but I've just caring. As simplistic as that sounds, it's very good, and I feel like we're in really good hands. So.
Well said. Thank you. I saw Charles Benson on the way to council meeting tonight, and I said, "Are you going to be there?" And he said, "Yeah." He doesn't even have something to represent from his department, but he said, "It's a lot of money, and I want to be there." And you're right. He and all the other department heads really support and stretch every dollar. We're so grateful. Any other comments or questions about the budget?
On behalf of the rest of the management and staff, thank you so much for the support and all the hours you put in, and for the generous comments. Thank you.
If there are no more comments, is anyone ready to make a motion?
Mayor, I'm prepared to make a motion that we adopt the fiscal year 22 amended budget and the fiscal year 23 final budget with the related transfer items.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. That motion passes. Thank you so much, Galen Rasmussen. And we will now move to the annual fraud risk assessment presentation. Mr. Tyson Beck.
Thank you, Mayor and members of the council. Really appreciate your time tonight and all the service that you do provide. We recognize that you put in many hours to sit in the seats that you do, and we thank you for your service. Tonight, bringing before you the presentation of the annual fraud risk assessment. This is a procedure that has been required by the Office of the State Auditor. And so every year they ask municipalities and other local governments to perform a fraud risk assessment. And the State Auditor's Office has put together a checklist and identified various items of internal control and policy that they deem are very important. And they ask us to go through this checklist each year and rate ourselves compared to this checklist. And so the checklist itself is made up of various different controls and policies, as I mentioned, and they then assign a point structure to each one of those checklist items. And then they have an overall assessment of where, based off of this checklist, where they deem you to be as far as a fraud risk. So the categories that you could receive are very low, moderate, high, or very high as in terms of fraud risk. And this is again based off of just the line items that they've suggested that we look at. I will say that a control environment is very complex, and it's not a one-size-fits all. So what might be a great control for one city or for one district might be a little bit burdensome and unnecessary to another. So you have to really analyze each aspect of a control environment, internal controls, policies, procedures, and determine what is the best fit for your entity. Because everyone does operate slightly different. We have different circumstances, and even from municipality to municipality, we run different operations. So we need to be cognizant of what's best for our circumstances. So, but the State Auditor's Office does a great job of trying to promote internal controls and what are good practices for people to implement, as well as trying to educate people on the risks of fraud and the importance of internal controls in mitigating that fraud. So definitely applaud the Office of the State Auditor for this annual requirement. And just here to report that Bountiful City has done the risk assessment for our 2022 fiscal year, and bringing that back to you. And it is in your packet, page 91 of the packet. And this is, again, that same checklist. Based off of our risk assessment, Bountiful would have earned a 335 points out of the 395 eligible, which puts us in that low category. There are a couple that we have not felt meet that cost-benefit ratio for Bountiful City, and so we have not implemented those specific controls or policies directly. But the assessment tonight is the same as the assessment we provided last year and the year before that. So we've always been in this low category. And I will mention that risk assessment has always been something that we've done at Bountiful City. This is long before it was required by the Office of the State Auditor. We were assessing our internal risks of fraud, of theft, of asset misappropriation. So we do take this very seriously, and it's been an ongoing practice for many, many years, and something that we do feel adamant about, and we implement procedures to try and mitigate fraud and to mitigate theft. So the presentation is just that we believe we're in this low fraud risk category. This report will be uploaded to the Office of the State Auditor, and they can do their own review from that point. But at this point, that's our fraud risk assessment for fiscal year 2022, and happy to answer specific questions you might have about it.
I have a question, Mayor, if I might. Tyson, and also Gary, this will probably be for you. I remember we had this discussion last year about our scorecard and the score we received, and the items that we answered no to and those we answered yes to. And one of those was employees and elected officials committing in writing to abide by a statement of ethical behavior. And I believe at the time, I don't want to put words in anyone's mouth, that the statement was, committing in writing wouldn't necessarily mean that people would do good things. Perhaps a bit of a philosophical difference with the auditor's office on the value of such a statement was the reason it wasn't adopted. But in the interest of low is good, very low is better, and that we do have written policies on a number of other things, on conflicts of interest, procurement, ethical behavior, those types of things, which also won't necessarily be the Jiminy Cricket if somebody really wants to not act ethically. I would just submit that we should revisit that 20 points in particular.
I know that part of we talked about this in the past, and part of it was it might be a little bit cumbersome for staff to try to require everyone to do it, track them down. But do you have any other thoughts about revisiting that idea?
Yeah, happy to address that. Of course, we're always open to the council's suggestions. One of the main concerns is we do have, in the ballpark of 300 people we would have to track down and get an annual statement from them every year. So from a practical standpoint, it is cumbersome and challenging. And to be honest, we've never felt that the cost-benefit ratio was high enough to implement a practice such as this. Again, open to the council's perspective on this, but we've wanted to be sensitive about a burdensome task that may or may not provide benefit.
So I have two questions in response. One would be, there is an annual process that all employees have to go through in choosing their health insurance options or lack of health insurance options. Could it be folded into that process as part of what they accept? If that is still cumbersome, and that tracking down a large group of employees is burdensome, but finding the 6 of us is less burdensome, would we receive half of the points in this process if the 6 of us are beyond thrilled to agree annually in writing to a statement of ethical behavior? Or does the state auditor's office only award full points and not half points?
All or nothing, I'm afraid.
Darn them. Okay, I'm back to my idea about health insurance.
The other side of that is this would include our part-time employees too, who don't go through the health insurance process. And so we would have to have somebody sign that every year when they're hired. That would include our golf employees and so it's certainly not impossible. I wouldn't even say it's not recommended. We have just in the past, as Tyson explained, said we think the likelihood of that one actually increasing ethical behavior is pretty small, even though it would give us more points. But I will say this: I do think it's important that the city have an ethics policy, and I think we could expand that ethics policy if we looked at it broader, not just to meet a requirement, but instead this would be an ethics policy that everybody would adhere to that is more than just financial. I think there's a lot of value in that. We just talked about this in some detail as a management team about the value of having one and developing one. And so I think what I might propose is that we go through that process and we fold it all in together.
That sounds good. Do you agree, Council?
I agree. My train of thought was going on the same train as Councilwoman Bradshaw, thinking I thought of open enrollment, but if it could be something, because doesn't each employee have to assign something when they're hired, whether or not they're full-time or part-time? And then it's just, I think if they just don't, something they have to do each year.
We can figure it out, and I don't think, again, it's a little bit of a burden, but the bigger goal, particularly if it is a broader ethics statement that deals with more than just finances, we're talking about ethics when dealing with our public, ethics and how a broader recognition of the fact that by being public servants, including the elected officials, that there are higher standards that we have to live by or should live by, that I think there's value in it.
I'd support that.
Thanks.
I would agree. Can I just say that? I would agree. I think it really, truly, an ethics policy and statement is a reflection of what I think all of us would consider our bountiful values. And to have that as part of our official procedures or policies, I think it is a powerful statement. And I do think, even though these things might seem like box checkers, they are put in front of people, and it is a reminder that this is something that is valued and important for every employee in the city. So,
I'm sure that Gary and Tyson and HR can think about the how, but I am wondering if something like a Google form or, could be emailed, or if it says in writing, I'm guessing that would still count if there's a form like that electronically, or anyway. I think we all feel comfortable with that direction, so thank you. Any other questions for Tyson on this? Do we need a motion?
No, this is just for information only. Yep.
Thank you. Okay, thank you so much for that. We will now consider approval of the rebuild of the 100 East Well by Nickerson Company. Mr. Craig Christensen.
Well, thank you, Mayor and City Council, for having me here this evening. Back in November of 2021, this first east well over here between 11th South and 10th South experienced a motor failure. And so when this motor failure happens, we're not able to use that well as one of our sources. So at the time, we just had Nickerson Company come out and get that process going. Supply chain problems, we knew that there was going to be to try to get that going again before the summer demand came around. So what they do is they come in, pull that equipment, the pump and motor, and then they get that sent out to have the motor evaluated to see if it can be rebuilt or what needs to be done there. So they had the pump rebuilt. We had a motor that was already rebuilt on the supplier's shelf just for the situation like this, so we can have that pretty quick. So they were able to get those put back together. We had low-grade explosives drop down into the well to help free up any of the mineral buildup that was there, and had it brushed as well to help improve the flows and increase the water production that we could get out of that well. Everything has been put back together. It's operational again. So this has just been reviewed by the city manager and the public works director, and it is staff recommendation that the city council approve the rebuild of the first east well in the amount of $49,402 from Nickerson Company.
Thank you. Any questions?
Yeah, what does it look like when the explosives are dropped down the well?
Not as fun as you would think it would be.
All right, I was just going to ask if you need help next time, let me know.
It's a pretty cool process.
Absolutely.
You know, they raise and lower that boom back up and down there and hook up more explosives and drop them down. But because they're in water, it doesn't do a whole lot as far as, there's not even a sound that comes out of it, so.
That's incredibly disappointing. I was super excited as well by the thought that we qualified them as both low-grade but explosive.
Yeah, right, so.
What percentage of water comes from the well compared to the city as a whole, all of our water sources?
So First East Well is one of the big wells that we love to use a whole lot around here. It does have the option on the outside of the building to have the unchlorinated water for the residents to go get. That pretty much runs 24 hours a day. It has a VFD in there now, which is a variable frequency drive that allows us to operate at 300 gallons a minute up to 1,200 gallons a minute if we need to. That helps fill up the Mill Creek Reservoir that we can pump all over the city from there. So it is a very valuable source that we need to have. So hopefully that helps you out.
I'll admit I was surprised by the what seems to be a very reasonable cost for the rehab of this well.
Yeah. So that was one of the things that Mark, back in the day, because the lifespan of these motors, submersible motors, is about 5 years, especially if they're running 24 hours a day. He had it rebuilt and had it out on the shelf at Nickerson. We did the exact same thing. So pump lead times could be 3-6 months right now. Wow. So we'll have another one on the shelf just waiting ready.
That's great foresight. Yeah, thank you.
Quick question.
Yes.
Do you have any idea, or can you track this, how much, or how many gallons per day are being utilized by people coming and getting that non-fluoridated water?
We don't have that metered at all. It's just a hose bib that's tapped onto the pipe. It is, when it's down, the phone calls that we get when it's down, people use that a lot, so. Okay. I'm sure you guys probably get some of those too, but I would say that it could be upwards of 5,000 to 7,000 gallons probably.
Wow.
Depending, summer months a lot more. I've seen the high school teams come down on their carts before football games and fill up the coolers for football games, so. Yep. I mean, it gets utilized a lot.
Thanks.
That's great.
Any other questions?
I'll make a motion to approve the 100 East well for rebuild for $49,402.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion passes. Thank you. And now we'll ask you for an introduction about considering Resolution 2022-08, amending watering restrictions.
Yes. So as you know, back in April, council approved a resolution for watering restrictions. That was Resolution 2022-04 and with Proclamation 2022-01. And that was to restrict our use of the culinary water for outside use, which would be watering lawns, gardens, things of that nature, to the 1 day a week because of the water outlook that we had back in March, April wasn't what it is now. And part of that is what we base off of is Weber Basin Sub-Conservancy District. They do all studies and keep us in the loop. We go to meetings with them, try to figure out what that water outlook's gonna be. So they had a severe, an extreme rating on their system, which said that they had to restrict each user or wholesale supplier X amount per what they could use for their allotment. And so they had cut irrigation down to 40%. They had just recently upgraded because of the amounts of rain and moisture that we have been receiving this spring to a severe rating. And so they changed their restrictions to 2 days a week. That in turn meant that Bountiful Irrigation changed theirs as well. And so kind of what we're looking for is to change our restriction from a 1 day restriction to a 2 day a week restriction as well. Try to keep things uniform across the board. And part of that would be having just certain days to do that. It would be done off of an address number, the last number of your address, kind of like it previously was, but it would add another day to it. So if you were a water day on Friday, it would be you'd have a Monday and a Friday. Most of the other guidelines, the principles that we have in there stay the same as the current resolution. But this one we'd like to change from June 22nd of 2022 to be effect through April 15th of 2023. Fine system would stay the same. All of those are pretty much the same, but it would be, this has been reviewed by all the staff here, planning director, water department, parks, city attorney, public works, city manager, have all been part of this. So it would be our recommendation to just change that dates and the watering restrictions to 2 days a week.
Thanks.
Entertain any questions if you have any.
Question. Since we're talking about on the graph, the areas that are in yellow,
Yes.
because those are the areas where Bountiful City is both the culinary water supplier and the outdoor water supplier.
Yes.
So that means those customers are all metered. Am I correct in
They are
understanding that?
metered, yes.
So whether they're using the water inside or outside, they're all metered,
Yes.
unlike those of us that might live in the blue or green areas, or the little bit of orange. One of the questions I had from residents who saw the ordinance in advance is the yellow areas on the map are some of our steeper terrain. And the comment that was raised was to water for 20 minutes on a sloped area means that the water just runs down and pools somewhere lower. It doesn't necessarily penetrate that sloped area of someone's yard. And I understand the reasons that perhaps that the 2 days a week, 20 minutes per sprinkler, 40 minutes per rotator, in the unmetered areas is there's no way to tell how much I might be using compared to a neighbor that's also unmetered, and so therefore that time limit becomes the way to keep us all even. In a metered situation, on a hillside area, does it make more sense for us to look at an allocation so that if somebody's on a hillside, they could say, look, it really only makes sense for me to water this area for 10 minutes, 20 minutes is too much, and allow that person the ability to use their allocation in shorter bursts because of their hillside location.
Okay.
That was a really long, complex, compound question with very few periods, so go for it.
Okay, so I guess what you're asking is if we could allow them to do 10 minutes on multiple days versus 20 minutes for 2 days.
Goal would be that they'd still use the same amount of water over the course of a 7-day time period.
Right, yeah. That is something, we haven't really talked a whole lot about that as staff. It's kind of been that we've trying to keep things as uniform as they possibly can between the restrictions at Bountiful Irrigation, South Davis, Dual Creek, and Weber Basin. It's all kind of, here's your 20 minutes, here's your 40 minutes, here's your 60 minutes. That's kind of where we've been at there, just trying to keep it uniform. I guess that could be one of those things that we talk about and see if there is something that we could change there, but.
Craig?
Yes.
So Councilman Bell sent an email with questions along the same lines about an allotment. Could you address that, not to steal your thunder, but that may also get at some of Kate's question?
Okay.
Is that okay?
Yes, yeah. So, as part of that email, they were talking about Bountiful Irrigation using a portion. And it didn't matter what day of the week you used for your portion. You could water 2 days in a row. I had called them and talked to them about that. They don't have certain days. You could allot that to 5 minutes here, 5 minutes there, 10 here, and that's great, but they don't do the restrictions that we have because they've got their allocated water, and once it's gone, it's gone. So, system shut off. Whereas with ours, we're trying to keep fire protection in there. The reservoirs were staffed to the point that it's hard to drive around and actually do all the restrictions. Even with the planning and the engineering in there, we just don't have the manpower to go around and see if they're staying in compliance or not. And so that's kind of one of those things. Weber Basin has smart meters installed on their irrigation. And so they know exactly how much as a customer, you could log in and look to see how much you were using that day. Our metering system is not that technical. It is an automated read system, but we'd have to go through and read that at least once a week to try to get, here's your allotment, here's your portion, and then divvy it up through the Munis system to try to get that figured out, and then we'd have to go through the restrictions that way. But as far as allocating to just letting them use it, 10 minutes here, 10 minutes there, 20 there, it might be a little difficult as far as enforcement-wise goes, because that kind of just lets anybody kind of go however they want, whenever they want. But
No, that's a helpful explanation in terms of the smartness of our combo culinary outdoor meters compared to the areas where Weber Basin has meters, which is not our 3 irrigation districts, but I think that's a helpful explanation as to why it does seem to me that our residents are talking with their relations up and down the Wasatch Front, and everybody is comparing what their water restrictions are in other parts of Davis County and in Salt Lake County and Utah County, and because we have an uneven system of water metering, an uneven system of water districts, and then an uneven system of drainages, and that doesn't get into the whole sharing of the water between the Weber and the Provo that I know has boiled up into a new water battle. It makes for an uneven experience of the drought. and then a very uneven experience municipality by municipality and water district by water district. And so I think some of that, because water law is frustratingly complicated and untransparent to the average person, when a resident might compare what their family member is doing in a different city, they come up with some of these questions. So I think that's a helpful explanation for all of us to have. I don't necessarily want us to reinvent the wheel mid-summer season. Maybe when we get to talking about our fund fiber discussion, maybe that will enable our meters to be smarter, and maybe that will allow this in a future drought cycle. But at least that satisfies my question for now.
Thanks. Any other questions?
Or if go ahead, Jesse.
I was just going to say, it seems, I appreciate your explanation also. A couple thoughts is it seems like whether we're checking the meters more frequently or not, we're still relying on the honor system of each property owner to conform to whatever regulation is put forth for water use, whether it's 1 day or 2 days, or on Saturday versus Wednesday. And I've had multiple people reach out to me with the confusion from what's on Bountiful Irrigation's website and Weber Basin's website and our website, and the confusion of days versus portions. I would love to see us at this time move from the days to the portions. It seems like all other terminology seems to be pretty well aligned and consistent between the different entities. And I don't see a huge advantage to using days versus portions and giving them a little bit more flexibility in maintaining their landscapes with limited water. So I'd like to, I don't know what the council's thoughts are with that, or if the staff has other thoughts regarding that, but that would be a preference for me.
Cassie, how would that, how would you define a portion?
Exactly how they've defined it in their letter. That Bountiful Irrigation sent this out. I received this today, coincidentally. It says, let's see here. All landscape turf plantings and gardens are allowed 2 watering portions per week. And then it defines what that portion is for 20 minutes per zone for a pop-up sprinkler head, 40 minutes per zone for rotary, drip zones, 60 minutes. So it's saying what that portion is, and that's the same, we've used that same definition as far as I can tell. We've just said it's 1 day as opposed to 1 portion. And then they go on to say that portion can be subdivided by the homeowner on multiple days if they chose.
If we did that, would the council be comfortable then if we just stopped enforcing the code? Because we won't be able to enforce it. We won't be able to tell when somebody's.
Right.
So if the council's okay with that, I don't think there's a problem, but we can't.
Are we enforcing it now?
Yes.
Yeah,
We
that
are,
goes
yes.
to my question. What is kind of a snapshot about compliance and enforcement up to this point? What does that look like? How many complaints? How have we enforced?
So we've given out a dozen warnings. We have not given any first offenses to where it is actually a fine attached to that. A lot of people call in with them, and by the time we get there, you can't tell that they've watered or not. So we actually have it set up on the email as well, so that somebody could send a picture, and then we can go up and give a fine that way, or a violation.
And it's mostly like neighbors complaining about their neighbor watering too
or
much.
people out walking the boulevard, somebody just driving by, coming back from a park with their kids, things of that nature.
And are those complaints about time of day watering or watering on days that they were not permitted?
It can be days that they're not permitted, it can be in the middle of the day, it can be they've watered every day this week. This person sprayed off their driveway 6 times in the last 7 days with their pressure sprayer. There's all sorts of things involved there, so.
I do recognize it does make it more complicated to enforce, and doing 2 days a week will also do that as well.
It's not that it would make it more complicated, it would actually be impossible to enforce. Because the only way we could enforce would be to see a violation and then have the person admit to us on investigation that they're not watering appropriately. Because simply by observing anymore, other than the time of day, we wouldn't be able to enforce. And the reason I raise that is because it's a big source of frustration to the public when we have rules that are not enforceable. And if somebody calls us and we say, well, I'm sorry, we can't, they're watering on the wrong day, we can't say, well, we know or we don't know. Mm-hmm. I just point that out because, and that's fine, but we would ask the council then that we not enforce. It would be a
portions or the days.
The days, or I mean, I think time of day we could probably enforce, but that's all we could enforce. Was time of day.
That's a good point. I appreciate that perspective.
What other questions do you have to council? Anybody ready for a motion?
Maybe a comment rather than a question. I'd really encourage everybody to conserve water. I'd also encourage people to not become informants on their neighbors. I don't want to live in that kind of world. So just kind of a comment. Thanks.
I have a question for Craig. How, one of my questions in considering a change to the ordinance was both you and our city engineer, when we adopted the prior ordinance, expressed some pretty big reservations about our ability to keep reservoirs for fire suppression full. Last year we had that awful example of 2 house fires in different parts of the city on the same day, and the demands plus the watering demands and the normal culinary use drew those down significantly. I've always viewed that there are kind of a bullseye ring of things that we have to protect, and public safety is at the heart of what a city needs to do, and then you work your way out to things like trails. But so how with this change as currently drafted, what does your concern level about our ability to meet that important reservoir storage for fire suppression as we head into our, what did you call them, low-grade explosive months? What is your comfort level given the way this ordinance is currently drafted?
So the way that it's currently drafted, I think we're going to be okay with 2 days a week. We should be fine. Last year we did 3 days, tapered it off to 2 days towards the end of the year for the August, September times. We were able to make it then. Did we, cut it a little close? Maybe a little bit. We did run into that one issue with the 17.8. That could have been contributed to the using that well too much, and it could have just been that's the way it was going to be. We have had phenomenal amounts of water coming down I shouldn't say phenomenal, sorry, but we've had a lot more water coming down.
Monday morning felt phenomenal when the thunderstorm shook
Yes.
my house multiple times.
Yes, it did. So the treatment plant has been producing a lot of water this year, which has helped us be able to fill up the reservoirs all the way up along across the boulevard. And then we've actually been able to drop some water down, so we have not been utilizing some of our wells as much as we typically would have.
At this point in the year?
Yeah, so we're doing good right now. And without not using those wells, that continues to raise that drawdown level of the aquifer. So
How much water are we getting from Mueller Park?
we're at between 1,300 and 1,400 gallons a minute right now.
Great.
So it has started to just taper off this last weekend, just a little bit, so.
So to pin you down, you feel comfortable with the way this is currently drafted and that fire suppression overlay requirement, but to modify it, you start to feel less comfortable. Is that accurate?
Yeah, so if we just went to a portion type of thing, where they could just go whenever and however they wanted to, if everybody decided to water at the same time up in Summerwood, we'd drain that reservoir. That's why we love the day schedule, because it only allows X amount of people that day to water up there. And so you can still have the domestic inside the home use plus the culinary outside use for those select homes. And then you have the Wednesday that you don't have any watering, that you're able to make sure that all those reservoirs are filled back up again, because there is no outside consumption.
Can I just recommend that if we go ahead and accept this ordinance, that we have a reminder on Facebook, that we ask our social media to put out like the days and the new restrictions, just so we can be clear with our residents about what the rule is.
We can post it on the water conservation page on the online on the city page as
Great.
well. So
That sounds good, thank you. Any other questions for Craig?
I'm prepared to make a motion.
Great.
I would make a motion that we adopt Resolution 2022-08 with the amended water restrictions as currently drafted. My reasons for making that motion are my underlying fire concerns. I hope my fire concerns are completely and totally unfounded, but I personally will never forget kind of the trauma of 2019 and the bee fire, and I would like us to be comfortably set in our allocations for fire suppression.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That passes, thank you.
I'd like to make a motion that we approve the purchase of a Dodge 1500 for the sum of $45,513.66, according to Mr. Christensen's write-up.
It's been moved and seconded, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion carries, thanks so much. And now,
Mayor, if I could just
Yes.
have one
Please.
comment for Councilwoman Bradshaw.
Mm-hmm.
We are working on the Viewmont well. That's going to be one of those things that we're trying to get done in this next budget year, and so we'll have another source of water. So,
Thank you.
that's great. We really appreciate all your diligence. Thank you.
thanks.
Excellent. Okay, we will now ask Mr. Todd Christensen to give us a little overview of the South Davis Sewer District and Dominion Energy payment for Eagle Ridge Drive project.
Thank you, Mayor. Madam Mayor, members of the City Council, as progress on the plans for the project to extend Eagle Ridge Drive from near the B over to Bountiful Boulevard, there are some utility expenses involved because we intend to include the placement of utilities with the project. And so this item is regarding a couple of those utilities and the fees assessed by them. South Davis Sewer District for $7,600 and Dominion Energy for $49,571.50. All of these expenses can and will be passed on to the developer per an agreement we have with the developer when Stone Creek Estates Phase 4 gets developed. And so the total is $57,171.50. It is recommended that the City Council authorize payment of $57,171.50 to the South Davis Sewer District and Dominion Energy for the Eagle Ridge Drive project.
So moved.
Second.
All in
And-
favor?
And excited to see this expense come across. Aye.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion passes. Thanks for being here tonight, Todd.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
We are adjourned. Thank you.